The entire auditorium froze as Braxton slammed Shyla's test score onto the projector, circling her name in red, yelling, "No way, she beat me." Laughter erupted. A teacher smirked. Phones recorded. No one stopped it. But as Shyla stood up, silent, humiliated, a notification popped up on every student's screen, and the truth was about to hit harder than any test score. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shyla Carter had learned long before arriving at Ridgeway Prep that silence was often the safest language a black girl could speak, in a place that watched her before it heard her. On her first day, the whispers weren't even subtle. They fluttered around her like drifting ashes, soft but carrying the sting of something burning underneath. Students glanced at her with the kind curiosity reserved for objects that did not belong on polished surfaces. Ridgeway's hallways gleamed with a curated shine, generations of wealth, tradition and quiet entitlement, layered like varnish on the walls. Most kids wore their confidence like tailored clothing. But Shyla walked with a collected stillness, gripping her books close, trying not to disturb the atmosphere that already seemed to reject her presence. Teachers greeted her with polite smiles that lacked warmth, as if performing the minimum requirement of civility. They emphasized her last name a second longer, as though it needed to be categorized mentally before they could continue. Students held doors open for one another, but they rarely held them for her. It wasn't blatant hostility. It was the kind of cold indifference that cuts deeper because it leaves no clear moment to point to, no solid proof of wrong. She simply drifted along the margins, unnoticed, uninvited, and silently absorbing more about the school's social hierarchy in a week than most newcomers grasped in a year. Ridgeway celebrated excellence with a near religious fervor, but it only admired excellence from those it already expected to excel. Its golden boy, Braxton Keller, embodied that expectation. Tall, athletic, clean-cut, and the son of an influential local judge, Braxton enjoyed the type of status that insulated him from true consequence. He was Ridgeway's pride, National Math League champion, debate star, and the face teachers always mentioned when inspiring younger students. In the school's unspoken hierarchy, he wasn't just a student, he was the standard. Yet Shyla, in all her quiet ways, never paid him the attention he assumed he deserved. Her silence to him felt like an affront, though she never intended it that way. While most students navigated their days through friend circles and predictable routines, Shyla retreated to corners where her presence felt less scrutinized. She often sat in the library during lunch, tracing sentences in dusty old academic books with the same gentleness she used to handle delicate objects. The librarians adored her for her curiosity, though they rarely saw her smile. She didn't need their validation, but she did appreciate the stillness of that space, a brief reprieve from the subtle but persistent feeling of being observed. What no one knew was that Shyla had been preparing her entire life for the National Academic Assessment Ridgeway held in almost mythical regard. Her late father, a community college professor, taught her to treat learning as a survival skill, not an achievement trophy. He had shown her how to see patterns where others saw noise, how to dismantle complex questions until the answers revealed themselves as naturally as breath. Even after his passing, Shyla carried his lessons like invisible armor. She studied not for applause but because knowledge gave her a sense of control in a world that constantly tried to deny her agency. So when Ridgeway announced participation in the National Scholar Rank exam, a fiercely competitive assessment taken by thousands across the country, students buzzed with anticipation. Braxton had dominated the leaderboard for years. His victories were an annual tradition, a predictable outcome that comforted Ridgeway's sense of superiority. Teachers speculated openly about how wide the margin of his next win would be. Some joked that the school ought to print his name pre-written on the congratulatory banner. Shyla heard those assumptions every day, and although they never unsettled her, they reminded her of the unspoken rules shaping the environment around her. Who was allowed to shine, and who was expected to stay quiet. On exam day, Shyla entered the testing room with a calmness mistaken for hesitance. Students swarmed around Braxton, offering him fist bumps and playful jabs, performing the predictable rituals of supporting a champion. No one spoke to her beyond a brief glance, confirming she was indeed sitting where no one expected her to matter. She took her seat near the window, an assigned location, but one she appreciated for the soft light that kept her steady. While others exchanged last-minute jokes, she studied the blank screen before her, imagining her father's voice reminding her that brilliance wasn't loud, it simply worked. The exam lasted hours, each moment curling into the next with increasing difficulty. Students shifted nervously in their seats, sighing as questions grew more complex. Braxton finished early, leaning back with a confident ease that radiated through the room. Shyla worked until the final minute, meticulously checking each response with a precision grounded not in fear, but discipline. When the proctor finally collected the last completed test, she breathed in deeply, letting the air settle inside her the way her father once taught her to do before facing anything uncertain. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. Ridgway treated the leaderboard announcement like a ceremonial event, assembling students in the main hall beneath banners that fluttered with the school's emblem. The principal stood at the podium, wearing a smile polished enough to appear sincere. Teachers positioned themselves strategically, ready with congratulatory nods for Braxton. His friends crowded near the front, phones out, prepared to capture the moment of yet another legacy win. The leaderboard loaded slowly on the massive screen, building suspense the way all traditions insisted it should. The crowd leaned forward collectively, hungry for the affirmation of their expectations. Then the ranking appeared, starting with the lower tiers. Nobody paid attention to the bottom names. All eyes waited for the number 1 slot. When the second-place name appeared as Braxton Keller, the hall erupted, not in cheers but in confusion. Silence rippled through the room like a sharp wind. It wasn't possible. It wasn't imaginable. Ridgway's golden boy had never been second to anyone. Certainly not on a national scale. The top name glowed at the center of the screen. Shyla Carter. For a moment the school seemed to tilt out of balance. Students squinted as though the letters were a trick of the light. Teachers exchanged startled glances, caught between disbelief and discomfort. The silence grew heavier, stretching into something dense and awkward, as though the air itself needed time to absorb what had happened. Shyla remained seated near the back, her expression unreadable. She did not bask in the attention, nor shrink from it. She simply existed in that moment, with the same quiet grace she always carried. Braxton, however, stood frozen, his jaw locked as he stared at the name resting above his. His friends looked at him immediately, searching for cues on how to react. His pride radiated through his posture like heat from asphalt, and the fracture forming in that pride was palpable. Some students stole cautious glances at Shyla, not in admiration, but in suspicion. The idea that she could legitimately surpass their golden boy felt to them like a break in the natural order of Ridgway. Their bodies tensed with unspoken questions, a kind that formed more from prejudice than logic. The small number of faculty who understood the significance of her accomplishment hesitated before offering any acknowledgement, as if praise needed permission. Braxton took a slow step forward, eyes still fixed on the screen. The principal cleared his throat, preparing to lead applause. But the room beat him to a different reaction. Low murmurs spreading through the hall, followed by nervous laughter, attempting to mask discomfort. Braxton's smirk formed gradually, rising like a shadow touched by light. He glanced at his circle, then toward Shyla with an expression that stretched thin between condescension and challenge. He leaned toward the students nearest to him, whispering something under his breath, too soft for teachers to catch, but loud enough for everyone around him to hear. Whatever he said struck the exact nerve he intended. Laughter burst from the group around him, sharp, dismissive, and suddenly infectious. Students turned toward Shyla, not with admiration, but with the same sharpened amusement that surfaces when a crowd decides someone is undeserving of a win. And as the sound of that mocking laughter spread across the room, Shyla looked up for the first time, meeting Braxton's stare. His smirk deepened, carrying a meaning she couldn't yet decipher, one that hinted that the leaderboard was only the beginning, and that he had no intention of letting her unexpected victory go unchallenged. Braxton's smirk lingered as he leaned closer to his friends, whispering something that triggered another wave of laughter, this time louder, directed unmistakably at Shyla, leaving her with a sudden chilling certainty that he was already planning something far worse than ridicule. The laughter didn't die out quickly. It spread like a stain across the polished floor of Ridgway's main hall, crawling from group to group, feeding on discomfort disguised as amusement. What should have been a moment of recognition, of academic triumph, turned into a performance of collective denial. Shyla Carter's name at the top of the leaderboard wasn't something they celebrated. It was something they laughed at, and no one laughed louder than Braxton Keller. To most students, Braxton's reaction felt like reassurance, a signal that things hadn't really changed. His grin told them it was still okay to dismiss what they didn't understand. His smirk rewrote the moment before it could become a narrative that challenged Ridgway's carefully protected image of who belonged on top. Later that afternoon, during lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with tension so thick it practically steamed off the trays. Shyla sat alone, As usual, her back to the corner wall. She didn't eat. She didn't need to. The high of victory had long dissolved into the low rumble of being targeted, and she could feel eyes sticking to her like dust. From every angle, whispers coated the air, coded phrases that always circled the same question. How could she have possibly won? Braxton's table, meanwhile, was louder than ever. His friends, sons and daughters of board members, CEOs, local politicians, egged him on like they were fueling a prizefighter. The topic had shifted from disbelief to strategy. If the system had failed to secure his place, he'd reclaim it through spectacle. His ego didn't bleed, it rebuilt, and it built quickly. By fifth period, the school's internal group chat, unofficially run by Braxton's clique, was buzzing with a flyer, digital, crudely designed and dripping with smug sarcasm. At the top, bold red letters screamed, "The winner's challenge, Shyla versus Braxton. Let's see if she's actually smart." The image beneath it showed a cartoon of Braxton in a cape and crown, squaring off against a scribbled stick figure, labeled Mysterious Genius. Students flooded the comments with laughing emojis, gifs of boxing gloves, and bets disguised as jokes. By the time school ended, the post had nearly 300 reactions. No one asked Shyla if she wanted to participate. That was never the point. By the next morning, Ridgway had unofficially adopted the challenge as its newest tradition. Teachers smiled nervously, pretending it was all in good fun. Even Principal Waverly, who was always quick to denounce real bullying, called it a healthy academic rivalry. When a student reporter asked if it was fair to target a new student in such a public format, the principal shrugged and replied that competition breeds character. In her AP calculus class, Shyla sat stone still as the teacher announced the details. A live academic face-off during Friday assembly, 3 timed rounds, moderated by faculty, with questions ranging across math, science, and logic. The event would be live-streamed across classrooms for engagement. There would be buzzers, timers, even a small trophy for the winner. Ridgway masked cruelty with structure. That was its gift. If it came dressed like school spirit, even racism could pass for celebration. The classroom erupted in light applause. Shyla didn't move. She felt her breath lock inside her chest, not out of fear but out of realization. Realization that the moment she beat Braxton, the system was already writing its revenge. Not through detention, not through suspension, through humiliation packaged as opportunity. After class, as students poured into the hall buzzing with anticipation, Braxton caught up to her near the lockers. He stood close enough to be felt, not just seen. His voice was low, slow, and coated with manufactured politeness. He asked if she was up for a little fun, his words curling at the edges like smoke. She looked at him without blinking. She said nothing. Silence was her protest, her defense, and her power, until now. Braxton didn't wait for a reply. He leaned closer, his smirk coiled like a whip ready to strike. He said the words slowly, each one landing like a tap on a bruise. "You'll wish you never opened your mouth." It wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was worse. It was a promise, dressed as arrogance, laced with something colder, certainty. He knew the room would be stacked in his favor. He knew the audience wouldn't see intellect. They'd see a spectacle. And deep down he also knew what Ridgway feared the most, a black girl being right. That evening, Shyla sat alone at her kitchen table, the flickering light above casting long shadows across her textbooks. Her mother stirred soup in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the stove, the only sound anchoring the silence. She had seen the flyer. She had heard about the challenge, but she said nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew Shyla needed space to choose her response on her own terms. Outside, the world moved on like it always did. But inside, Shyla stared down a decision that had no right answer. If she declined, they would call her afraid. If she accepted, they would turn her into a sideshow. Either way, she would lose something. Her peace, her privacy, her place. But then she thought of her father, of the quiet evenings spent solving equations he pulled from old textbooks, and how he once told her that knowledge wasn't just power, it was proof. Proof that she deserved to be anywhere she chose. The next morning, Shyla walked into the principal's office during homeroom and said 3 words, "I'll do it." The news hit the school like a dropped match in a dry forest. The challenge was officially sanctioned, scheduled for Friday morning assembly in the auditorium. Students were allowed to wear Ridgway colors. Faculty added extra credit for attendance. It wasn't just a competition. It had become an event. And as the hype swelled, so did the undertone. Of something darker. Rumors began spreading. Jokes that Shyla had hacked the test. That maybe someone fed her answers. That her win was just a glitch in the system. The more she prepared, the more the narrative twisted. Her intelligence wasn't being tested anymore. Her very right to exist in their space was. Meanwhile, Braxton rehearsed like a performer preparing for opening night. He turned the challenge into a stage show, practicing hand gestures, perfecting his gracious post-victory speech, even coordinating outfits with his friends who would sit front row. To him, it wasn't about proving he was smarter. It was about putting Shyla back in her place without ever appearing cruel. But what he didn't know, what Ridgway had yet to see, was that Shyla wasn't just preparing answers. She was studying them too. The system, the people, the audience. She wasn't walking into that auditorium as a competitor. She was walking in as a mirror, and what they'd see reflected back would be far more threatening than any score. By Thursday, the Ridgway Student Council released a promo video for the Winners Challenge, complete with dramatic music, student interviews, and a narrator who described it as the battle of the brains we've all been waiting for. Not a single student of color was featured in the footage. Not one teacher questioned that. That night, as Shyla sat at her desk reading through logic puzzles, her computer dinged with a notification. An anonymous message had been sent through the school's system. It read, "Lose quietly. We don't need another scene." She didn't respond. But she didn't sleep much either. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. The auditorium lights were too bright, the stage too high, the chairs too closely packed. Shyla and Braxton stood on opposite ends, buzzers between them, faculty seated like judges. The crowd crackled with anticipation. Ridgway's walls had never been louder, and just as the principal took the mic to introduce the challenge, a student in the second row leaned over to another and whispered loud enough for it to be heard across the front half of the auditorium. "Let's see if she even knows how to use the buzzer." The crowd laughed. Braxton grinned. The principal didn't flinch. Shyla stood still, her hands by her sides, eyes focused on the screen in front of her. But inside, she wasn't still at all. Inside, something had shifted. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every whisper, every denial, every forced silence that students like her had endured without anyone watching. And as the moderator lifted the first question card, ready to speak into the microphone, Braxton leaned toward her ever so slightly, wearing the same condescending smile as before. But before the first question could even be asked, the giant screen above them flickered once, then again, and suddenly went black. A low gasp filled the room as the lights above the stage dimmed. Then, out of nowhere, a pre-recorded video began playing, and it wasn't part of the challenge. The moment the screen above the stage flickered to black, a wave of murmurs rippled through the auditorium. At first, it seemed like a technical glitch, unfortunate, perhaps, but not unusual. The moderator paused, glancing behind the curtain toward the tech crew, waiting for a signal. Students leaned forward in their chairs, some groaning, others laughing nervously, but then the speakers let out a crisp pop, and a grainy video clip began playing. The footage was low angle and shaky, clearly recorded without consent. The camera pointed toward the hallway outside the math wing, and Shyla was visible, alone, walking with her books clutched tightly, earbuds in, unaware. Then the audio kicked in. Laughter, not hurt. The camera swung around to show Braxton and two of his friends hiding behind a door, one holding up a phone, recording her from afar. The voiceover wasn't part of the original audio. It had been added later. A synthetic voice, anonymous, filtered, narrated over the scene like a sports commentator. "Here comes Ridgway's surprise genius. Quiet, awkward, and allegedly brilliant. Will she survive tomorrow's challenge, or fold under the lights like a dollar store tent? Place your bets, folks." The crowd erupted, not in outrage, but in laughter. Not because the content was funny, but because the anonymity of it gave them permission. They laughed because they could, because someone had packaged humiliation as entertainment, and Ridgway had long forgotten how to tell the difference. The screen quickly cut to a new clip, this one from the cafeteria. Shyla was seated in her usual corner, eating in silence. Braxton's voice was audible in the background, throwing mock praise. "Look at our little Einstein, just waiting for her next multiple-choice miracle." The same artificial narrator chimed in again. "What do you think, folks? Real deal or glitch in the system? Vote below. Donations open." Students gasped. A handful cheered. Most were stunned into silence. But not because they were offended, because the line between school rivalry and social media spectacle had fully blurred. Multiple someones, had turned the winner's challenge into a live stream event. The clips weren't just being shown inside Ridgeway. They were being broadcast on a hidden link through a private streaming site, complete with real-time comments, donation buttons, and vote polls labeled "Who deserves to win" and "Guess her final score." The school had become a stage. The students, an audience. And Shyla, she wasn't a participant anymore. She was content. From the wings of the stage, Miss Kincaid, the media studies teacher, rushed to the tech booth, whispering frantically. The principal spoke into his mic, trying to override the feed, but it was locked in. Whoever had uploaded the video had embedded it with fail-safes. The tech staff scrambled behind the scenes, unplugging cables, rebooting routers. But the damage was already done. Shyla sat frozen under the spotlight, her hands motionless on the desk, watching her private moments looped like highlights in a circus. Her pulse was deafening in her ears, but her face gave away nothing. Years of staying invisible had taught her how to survive moments like this, by shrinking inward, by showing them nothing. But this was different. This wasn't silence. This was erasure masquerading as fame. What no one had told her, what everyone else seemed to know and celebrate, was that this event had been engineered, not for fairness, but for exposure. An underground student-run livestream, masked as a fan page, had hyped the event all week under fake names. Braxton's inner circle had been promoting it through anonymous accounts, collecting donations from alumni, and even a few local influencers who were sold on the Genius face-off as edgy, inclusive content. Ridgeway didn't just allow it. They pretended not to see it because it didn't technically break any rules. Because the line between cruel and clever had long been erased, especially when the target was someone the system never truly included. The footage finally ended, with a logo designed like a gaming tournament badge, reading "Genius Dropout Live, Round 1 begins now." The screen went dark again. Principal Waverly, red-faced and stumbling, approached the mic, offering an awkward chuckle. He dismissed the video as unauthorized content, insisting it would be investigated thoroughly. But his tone wasn't protective. It was irritated, not because of the racism embedded in the footage, but because of the optics. Because Ridgeway's pristine image had been scratched on livestream. That was the real emergency. With forced smiles, faculty redirected the audience's attention to the challenge at hand. The buzzers were tested. The scoreboard was reset. Students leaned in again. Everyone pretended nothing had happened. Shyla didn't speak. She didn't move. But inside her, something heavy cracked open. Not anger, but something colder. Resolve. The moderator read the first question aloud. A layered probability riddle. Difficult but solvable. Before Braxton even reached for his buzzer, a small click echoed beneath Shyla's desk. It was so faint, no one noticed. But she did. Her right buzzer, the main one she'd practiced with, went dead. No light, no sound. She pressed it again. Nothing. She glanced under the table, pretending to adjust her seat, and saw it barely visible behind the support beam. The cable had been half pulled from the port, not fully detached, just loose enough to register no signal. It hadn't been like that during the setup. She had tested it herself before walking onto the stage, and she had seen Braxton's best friend, Logan, lingering by her side of the table during the technical prep, laughing with the AV student behind the console. He wasn't part of the event, but he'd been given access, all in the name of helping. The sabotage was subtle, just enough to throw her. Just enough to make it look like she'd panicked under pressure. The moderator called out, 5 seconds remaining. Without flinching, Shyla reached for the backup buzzer on her left side. Slower, less intuitive. Her hand grazed it just as Braxton slapped his, answering the question half a second early. The auditorium erupted in applause. Braxton flashed his signature grin, performing humility, soaking in the validation. The scoreboard blinked. Braxton won, Shyla. But Shyla didn't look at him. She didn't even blink at the crowd. She stared directly into the camera above the stage. The same camera broadcasting this moment to every classroom, and silently, to every hidden viewer online. Because she knew now. This wasn't just about beating her. This was about breaking her publicly, piece by piece, so that even her victories would be twisted into shame. And they almost succeeded. Until a subtle motion caught her attention. Just out of the corner of her eye, in the second row, someone stood up. Not a student, not faculty, a stranger.
No badge. No school colors.
A woman in plain clothes, holding a press pass tucked into her blazer. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't applauding. She was recording. Shyla's eyes narrowed. Not at Braxton, not at the rigged game, but at the woman filming quietly from the crowd. Because that woman wasn't supposed to be there. And Shyla suddenly remembered her face. She'd seen it once before, on a news website, next to a headline about whistleblowers and private school corruption. The sudden blare of the fire alarm hit the auditorium like a sledgehammer. For a moment, time fractured, fluorescent lights flickered, the live stream feed stuttered, and a heavy echo of metal and panic replaced the earlier buzz of expectation. Students stood abruptly, some yelling, others frozen. Faculty hurried toward the aisles, voices raised in confusion and concern. In the chaos, the academic challenge, the winner's challenge that had promised spectacle collapsed into chaos before a single test question could land. Shyla Carter remained seated. Her heart pounded. But externally she showed nothing. Years of living at the margins had taught her that calm could be more dangerous than fear. She watched as teachers ushered students out. As some tripped over backpacks, others shoved toward exits. The camera above the stage swung uselessly to the empty scoreboard. The pristine stage that had seemed so imposing minutes earlier suddenly looked hollow, like a set stripped bare. The announcement over the intercom was indistinct. Commotion? Instructions. A call to evacuate. The principal's voice cracked somewhere underneath scrambled echoes of urgency. But between those instructions and the raucous murmurs of students, a subtle undercurrent formed, one of accusation and suspicion. It drifted in the air like a stain. Some students glanced at Shyla with quick discomfort, as if the chaos itself could be pinned to her presence. Her skin, previously ignored or tokenized, now felt like a spotlight. As she rose, rubrics and prepared confidence dissolved into the tightening ache at the base of her throat. Faculty members guided students toward exits. But one teacher, a woman whose eyes flickered with something unsettled, passed her slowly, her gaze lingering just a moment too long. In that look there was neither comfort nor apology, only calculation. Outside the auditorium, the hallway was thick with confusion. Students clustered in groups, phones lighting faces, whispers about what triggered the alarm. Some said a smoke detector malfunctioned, others that someone pulled the lever intentionally. A shiver of fear and suspicion pulsed through the crowd. Rumors began even before the last student exited the building. Shyla moved as others moved. Silent steps among a sea of half-lit corridors and scattered backpacks. The unsaid accusation hung in the air like a question mark scribbled in dust. Who started this? Who dared? Almost everyone seemed to glance at her at least once, as if searching for the culprit. The irony pressed against her skin. She had walked into a challenge set up as public humiliation, only to find herself blamed for chaos she didn't cause. A small group of Braxton's friends, faces flushed with adrenaline, formed a tight circle near the lockers. As Shyla passed, one of them stepped forward, not with hostility, but with a confrontational curiosity. The others watched, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Their silence loomed heavier than words. It was a moment meant to intimidate, to mark territory. Shyla paused, gripping her books a little tighter, refusing to meet their eyes. She edged past. No one spoke. Not even shouts filled the hallway. The only sound was the distant wail of sirens approaching the campus gates, mingling with the low murmur of frightened voices. In that hush, the school's veneer of civility cracked, revealing how thin the line was between order and accusation, between acceptance and rejection. Within minutes, administrators corralled students into small groups, checking roll calls, asking questions. Shyla answered calmly, stating she had walked directly out and had no idea what triggered the alarm. Her voice was measured, but inside, a storm roiled. The betrayal wasn't just the alarm. It was how fast assumptions folded, how easily suspicion landed on her alone. A teacher beside her lowered their clipboard after verifying her name. The relief she tried to show was minimal, too contrived against the backdrop of the earlier broadcast that had turned her privacy into mockery. But the teacher avoided eye contact afterward. In that avoidance, Shyla read volumes: fear of association, fear of complication, fear of consequences. Her skin felt heavier under their eyes. Minutes later, faculty herded students toward the dean's office, a quiet, somber corridor, far from the auditorium's bright lights. There, in a bare room with gray walls and a single desk, Shyla waited while the principal and the dean whispered somewhere beyond the closed. The muffled voices drifted out, official-sounding tones, words like investigation, safety protocols, live stream, but none mentioning anything about racism. None acknowledging their part in staging the challenge. None owning responsibility for what had happened. When the door opened, Shyla stood. Her posture was steady, but inside, the tension coiled like steel. The dean offered a forced apology for the disruption and assured her the fire alarm would be investigated. She handed Shyla a slip, a notice of delay, the challenge postponed, another date to be set, but it wasn't the relief many expected. It was a thin bandage over a deeper wound. The institution still held control. She had only been moved aside. As she left the office, the corridor felt longer, emptier. The walls seemed colder now. Some students passed by, faces downcast, avoiding her gaze. Others scrolled on their phones, pretending not to have noticed anything. No words followed her, no offers of solidarity, just muttered apologies and uncertain glances. Silence reigned, louder than any scream. She rounded the corner near the art wing. The halls were quiet. Most students had already gone home. As she passed the last painting along the wall, a bright abstract swirl, some freshman had painted, she saw a teacher leaning against the doorframe. The teacher's face was stern, lips pressed into a thin line. Without speaking, the teacher reached into a pocket and retrieved a small folded piece of paper. Their fingers trembled slightly, maybe from guilt or fear, or something heavier. They held it out to Shyla. Shyla's hand curled in instinctive refusal, but the teacher did not press. In that moment, the teacher's eyes flicked away, avoiding any real contact. Then they said nothing aloud. No words. Instead, they turned and walked away quickly, disappearing around the corner before she could respond. The folded paper fell into her hand, light but heavy with intent. Under the hallway's dull fluorescent lights, she unfolded it. The paper was small, plain white, but the words scrawled on it, just four, felt jagged and cold. "You're not safe here." For a heartbeat, the corridor stood still. The message didn't just threaten. It confirmed something Shyla already suspected. Safety had always been conditional for her at Ridgeway. The challenge, the live stream, the sabotage, the public gaze, they were all designed to displace her, to remind her that she belonged nowhere in their shining halls. Her fingers tightened around the note. The image of Braxton's smirk floated behind her closed eyes. The auditorium's empty stage lingered in her mind, the whispered laughter echoing in judgments, the crowd's apathetic cheers, the roars of approval for humiliation packaged as entertainment, all pressed against the very edge of her resolve. Shyla didn't crumple the paper. She didn't tear it. She didn't respond. She just stood there, in the corridor, hearing the distant sirens, feeling the weight of every look that had fallen on her that day, remembering every click of the live stream camera, the hush that followed every silent accusation. A faint shape moved at the far end of the hallway. The teacher who had given her the note, now absent, swallowed by the shadow of the corridor. She blinked away the sting in her eyes and folded the paper back neatly, slipping it into her pocket. Then she turned slowly, her steps quiet but deliberate toward the exit. In that walk was defiance, not loud, not violent, but unbending. She was leaving the building, not just as a student dismissed from an event, but as someone who had just received a message she would never ignore. And as the heavy metal door closed behind her, the echo sounded not like an ending, but like a beginning. Outside, the parking lot was empty and silent, except for the distant sound of a single car door slamming shut. Shyla looked up, and a sleek black SUV idled at the edge of the lot, its tinted windows dark. No lights inside, no driver in sight. But in the dim glow of the street lamp, she could have sworn she saw movement, someone watching. Before she could decide whether to hurry or hide, the SUV's hazard lights flicked on. The tension inside Ridgeway's auditorium had settled into a strange rhythm, a false sense of normalcy returning after the broadcast disruption and whispered accusations. Faculty reassured the crowd, acting as if the earlier sabotage hadn't just tainted the event's integrity. The school had always been skilled at performance, at masking discomfort under protocol, and today was no different. The winner's challenge was back on, and every eye was locked on the stage. Braxton Keller sat in his chair like a king, returned to his throne. He moved with practiced confidence, offering polite nods to the moderators, checking his buzzers, as if nothing had been tampered with, as if the entire setup wasn't his stage to begin with. His blazer was pressed to perfection, his sleeves rolled just enough to suggest casual intelligence. Everything about him had been curated for victory, even if that victory had to be manufactured. Shyla Carter, however, was done pretending. Her chair was slightly off-center from the spotlight, her nameplate shorter, the buzzer cord taped with cheap electrical strip after the first one had mysteriously failed. But her expression was a new kind of stillness, Not the silence of fear, but the control of someone who had seen every attempt to erase her and still refused to vanish. The first round began with logic problems, puzzles meant to test analytical reasoning under pressure. Braxton buzzed in fast, eager to claim the lead early. His answers were polished, confident, almost rehearsed. The audience clapped each time, feeding his rhythm. But Shyla didn't race. She listened, calculated, and waited. When she buzzed, she did so with precise timing, her answers delivered softly, never rushed. She didn't glance at the scoreboard. Her focus remained fixed on the questions, dissecting them piece by piece. The judges glanced at each other more than once, surprised not just by her accuracy, but by the clarity of her logic. By round 2, the rules shifted. A timed relay of multi-part problems with bonus points for deductions and extrapolations. The complexity increased, and so did the distractions. Braxton's side of the room grew louder. Laughter at her pauses, coughs that punctuated her answers. Students shifting loudly in seats. One even dropping a binder deliberately just as she prepared to buzz. She noticed all of it, every tactic, every interruption, but she didn't react. Years of navigating rooms, not made for her, had taught Shyla how to remain composed under invisible pressure. They wanted her to flinch, to fumble. She gave them neither. Halfway through the second question, the screen flickered again. Not enough to halt the match, just enough to blink the timer for a fraction of a second. A glitch, the moderator said. Nothing more. But it conveniently occurred during one of her turns, shaving crucial seconds off her response time. The scoreboard lagged after her answer, showing Braxton in the lead. Even though she'd answered correctly, she didn't protest. Instead, on the next question, she answered before the moderator had finished reading. The room gasped, assuming a mistake. But her solution was flawless. Not only had she anticipated the question's pattern, she'd seen the logic seed planted in earlier problems. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was predicting. Braxton's smirk began to falter. By the final round, the points were tight. The questions turned abstract, open-ended challenges, requiring rapid hypotheses. A format that Ridgway never used before, likely tailored to favor Braxton's debate-trained rhetoric. But the gamble backfired. Where he stumbled into over-explanations, Shyla stripped answers to their essence. She translated scientific complexity into raw, elegant simplicity. Even the judges struggled to hide their admiration. Still, the sabotage didn't stop. Her final worksheet slid across the table, had smudged print, one entire equation, partially blurred. Her request for clarification was met with a dismissive shrug. Time ticked down, and yet she solved it, not by sight, but by inference. She reverse-engineered the problem, based on partial symbols, recognizing structure from memory. Her pen moved with the grace of certainty, as if her father's voice still lived in her fingertips. Braxton saw it. He looked across the table, eyes scanning her paper, jaw clenching. Then, in one last attempt to reclaim dominance, he leaned back dramatically, answered his final question with unnecessary flair, and flashed a charming smile to the crowd. It didn't land. Because this time, when the moderator announced her score, the reaction wasn't silence. It was stunned quietude. A hush, not of doubt, but of disbelief. The final tallies appeared on the board. Shyla, Braxton, the numbers glowed. Steady, undeniable. The auditorium froze. No one cheered. No one clapped. The weight of reality fell hard on every corner of the room. Ridgway had its answer, and it wasn't the one they wanted. Shyla didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She remained seated, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes locked ahead. The moderator cleared their throat. The principal stepped forward, stammering something about both being excellent and an inspiring performance, trying to smooth over the cracks. But the cracks were visible now. The illusion had fractured. Braxton stared at the board, then at her. His expression flickered, confusion, anger, something almost close to panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This was her second victory, and this time, it had been public, recorded, watched. And just as the moderator extended a hand to congratulate both students, a sudden shrill sound tore through the auditorium. The fire alarm. Again, students jumped. Teachers shouted. Lights above flickered as doors slammed open. For the second time that week, the challenge collapsed into chaos. Only this time, the victory was already sealed. Shyla stood slowly. Her ears rang from the alarm's pulse, but her focus was razor sharp. This wasn't a coincidence. Not twice. Braxton was already gone. He had moved the second the alarm sounded, disappearing backstage with his entourage. The moderator fumbled with papers. The principal barked into a walkie-talkie, and students scrambled to grab their belongings. But Shyla didn't move toward the exit. Not yet. She stepped off the stage, slipping past faculty, weaving through scattered chairs and startled students. Near the far wall, behind the judge's table, a cord dangled from the fire alarm panel, not in place. It had been tampered with, and on the floor beneath it, half hidden beneath a crumpled brochure, lay a broken USB drive, a small piece of black plastic, not hers. She picked it up slowly, turning it in her fingers, heart thudding as she recognized the brand, the same one the tech crew used to load competition content. Except this one had a label, written in pen, faded but legible. Round 3. Edited. Her blood chilled. The challenge wasn't just manipulated in real time. It had been pre-altered. The questions, the scoring, everything. They had planned multiple outcomes, multiple ways to steal her win. But someone had failed to cover their tracks. She glanced up toward the crowd, funneling out of the auditorium, and spotted Logan, Braxton's closest friend, standing still at the back of the hall. He wasn't moving. He wasn't helping anyone exit. He was watching her, eyes narrowed, hands in pockets, and he didn't look nervous. He looked prepared. Shyla's fingers tightened around the USB. She slipped it into her coat pocket and turned away, stepping out into the growing chaos of the corridor. But even as the crowd surged around her, something told her the sabotage wasn't over. Not yet. As she made her way down the hall, fire alarms blaring, a voice came over the school intercom. Not the principal's, not faculty. A distorted, scrambled recording played loud and clear. This school doesn't belong to her. She doesn't belong here. The hallway erupted in gasps. Someone had hijacked the system. The sudden blare of the fire alarm hit the auditorium like a sledgehammer. For a moment, time fractured. Fluorescent lights flickered. The stream feed stuttered, and a heavy echo of metal and panic replaced the earlier buzz of expectation. Students stood abruptly, some yelling, others frozen. Faculty hurried toward the aisles, voices raised in confusion and concern. In the chaos, the academic challenge, the winner's challenge, that had promised spectacle collapsed into chaos before a single test question could land. Shyla Carter remained seated. Her heart pounded, but externally she showed nothing. Years of living at the margins had taught her that calm could be more dangerous than fear. She watched as teachers ushered students out, as some tripped over backpacks, others shoved toward exits. The camera above the stage swung uselessly to the empty scoreboard. The pristine stage that had seemed so imposing minutes earlier suddenly looked hollow, like a set stripped bare. The announcement over the intercom was indistinct. Commotion, instructions, a call to evacuate. The principal's voice cracked, somewhere underneath scrambled echoes of urgency. But between those instructions and the raucous murmurs of students, a subtle undercurrent formed, one of accusation and suspicion. It drifted in the air like a stain. Some students glanced at Shyla with quick discomfort, as if the chaos itself could be pinned to her presence. Her skin, previously ignored or tokenized, now felt like a spotlight. As she rose, rubrics and prepared confidence dissolved into the tightening ache at the base of her throat. Faculty members guided students toward exits, but one teacher, a woman whose eyes flickered with something unsettled, passed her slowly, her gaze lingering just a moment too long. In that look there was neither comfort nor apology, only calculation. Outside the auditorium, the hallway was thick with confusion. Students clustered in groups, phones lighting faces, whispers about what triggered the alarm. Some said a smoke detector malfunctioned, others that someone pulled the lever intentionally. A shiver of fear and suspicion pulsed through the crowd. Rumors began even before the last student exited the building. Shyla moved as others moved. Silent steps among a sea of half-lit corridors and scattered backpacks. The unsaid accusation hung in the air like a question mark scribbled in dust. Who started this? Who dared? Almost everyone seemed to glance at her at least once, as if searching for the culprit. The irony pressed against her skin. She had walked into a challenge set up as public humiliation, only to find herself blamed for chaos she didn't cause. A small group of Braxton's friends, faces flushed with adrenaline, formed a tight circle near the lockers. As Shyla passed, one of them stepped forward, not with hostility, but with a confrontational curiosity. The others watched, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Their silence loomed heavier than words. It was a moment meant to intimidate, to mark territory. Shyla paused, gripping her books a little tighter, refusing to meet their eyes. She edged past. No one spoke. Not even shouts filled the hallway. The only sound was the distant wail of sirens approaching the campus gates, mingling with the low murmur of frightened voices. In that hush, the school's veneer of civility cracked, revealing how thin the line was between order and accusation, between acceptance and rejection. Within minutes, administrators corralled students into small groups, checking roll calls, asking questions. Shyla answered calmly, stating she had walked directly out and had no idea what triggered the alarm. Her voice was measured, but inside, a storm roiled. The betrayal wasn't just the alarm. It was how fast assumptions folded, how easily suspicion landed on her alone. A teacher beside her lowered their clipboard after verifying her name. The relief she tried to show was minimal, too contrived against the backdrop of the earlier broadcast that had turned her privacy into mockery. But the teacher avoided eye contact afterward. In that avoidance, Shyla read volumes: fear of association, fear of complication, fear of consequences. Her skin felt heavier under their eyes. Minutes later, faculty herded students toward the dean's office, a quiet, somber corridor far from the auditorium's bright lights. There, in a bare room with gray walls and a single desk, Shyla waited while the principal and the dean whispered somewhere beyond the closed door. The muffled voices drifted out, official-sounding tones, words like investigation, safety protocols, live stream, but none mentioning anything about racism, none acknowledging their part in staging the challenge, none owning responsibility for what had happened. When the door opened, Shyla stood. Her posture was steady, but inside the tension coiled like steel. The dean offered a forced apology for the disruption and assured her the fire alarm would be investigated. She handed Shyla a slip, a notice of delay. The challenge postponed, another date to be set. But it wasn't the relief many expected. It was a thin bandage over a deeper wound. The institution still held control. She had only been moved aside. As she left the office, the corridor felt longer, emptier. The walls seemed colder now. Some students passed by, faces downcast, avoiding her gaze. Others scrolled on their phones, pretending not to have noticed anything. No words followed her. No offers of solidarity, just muttered apologies and uncertain glances. Silence reigned, louder than any scream. She rounded the corner near the art wing. The halls were quiet. Most students had already gone home. As she passed the last painting along the wall, a bright abstract swirl some freshman had painted, she saw a teacher leaning against the doorframe. The teacher's face was stern, lips pressed into a thin line. Without speaking, the teacher reached into a pocket and retrieved a small folded piece of paper. Their fingers trembled slightly, maybe from guilt or fear or something heavier. They held it out to Shyla. Shyla's hand curled in instinctive refusal, but the teacher did not press. In that moment, the teacher's eyes flicked away, avoiding any real contact. Then they said nothing aloud. No words. Instead, they turned and walked away quickly, disappearing around the corner before she could respond. The folded paper fell into her hand, light but heavy with intent. Under the hallway's dull fluorescent lights, she unfolded it. The paper was small, plain white, but the words scrawled on it, just four, felt jagged and cold. "You're not safe here." For a heartbeat, the corridor stood still. The message didn't just threaten, it confirmed something Shyla already suspected. Safety had always been conditional for her at Ridgeway. The challenge, the live stream, the sabotage, the public gaze, they were all designed to displace her, to remind her that she belonged nowhere in their shining halls. Her fingers tightened around the note. The image of Braxton's smirk floated behind her closed eyes. The auditorium's empty stage lingered in her mind, the whispered laughter echoing in judgments, the crowd's apathetic cheers, the roars of approval for humiliation packaged as entertainment, all pressed against the very edge of her resolve. Shyla didn't crumple the paper. She didn't tear it. She didn't respond. She just stood there, in the corridor, hearing the distant sirens, feeling the weight of every look that had fallen on her that day, remembering every click of the live stream camera, the hush that followed every silent accusation. A faint shape moved at the far end of the hallway. The teacher who had given her the note, now absent, swallowed by the shadow of the corridor. She blinked away the sting in her eyes and folded the paper back neatly, slipping it into her pocket. Then she turned slowly, her steps quiet but deliberate, toward the exit. In that walk was defiance, not loud, not violent, but unbending. She was leaving the building, not just as a student dismissed from an event, but as someone who had just received a message she would never ignore. And as the heavy metal door closed behind her, the echo sounded not like an ending, but like a beginning. Outside, the parking lot was empty and silent, except for the distant sound of a single car door slamming shut. Shyla looked up, and a sleek black SUV idled at the edge of the lot, its tinted windows dark, no lights inside, no driver in sight. But in the dim glow of the street lamp, she could have sworn she saw movement, someone watching. Before she could decide whether to hurry or hide, the SUV's hazard lights flicked on. The day after the fire alarm and the hacked intercom message, Ridgeway Prep didn't speak of what happened. It silenced it. No official emails were sent. No apology issued. No investigation launched. The phrase technical difficulties was circulated like disinfectant, sprayed on every corner of the incident until the chaos was sterilized and safe for PR. But beneath the surface, a different kind of message spread, quiet, calculated, and razor-sharp. The morning after, Shyla Carter sat in her usual seat, but the space around her had changed. Desks once close were now mysteriously shifted further away. Conversations near her paused mid-sentence, then resumed with quiet smirks and subtle glances. The stares weren't wide-eyed curiosity anymore. They were loaded, suspicious, bitter, afraid. The silence felt worse than confrontation. Braxton didn't return to class that day, or the day after. His absence became the new rallying point for whispered sympathy. Rumors spread that he was emotionally shaken, humiliated, publicly torn down. Staff repeated these words, with quiet concern. Some even suggested Shyla's victory had gone too far, that the live stream, the sabotage, the hacked announcement had hurt him most. The absurdity of it was surgical. Ridgeway had always been skilled at flipping the narrative when whiteness was at risk of consequence. By Wednesday, a few teachers had begun referring to her by her last name only, stripping her of personhood in a way that felt institutional. Even the substitute in English Lit asked if she'd considered the emotional consequences of academic aggression, as if solving math problems too efficiently was a form of violence. Her classmates didn't threaten her. They didn't need to. Their compliance, their refusal to challenge the culture shifting around her, was punishment enough. The students who had once nodded politely in hallways no longer acknowledged her. The ones who had congratulated her quietly after the challenge now avoided eye contact. Ridgeway had a way of enforcing its unwritten rules through withdrawal, a suffocating kind of isolation disguised as routine. The only person who hadn't changed was Shyla. She didn't react, not in the way they wanted. Her silence remained intact, but something deeper had hardened beneath it. She moved through halls as if she were still invisible, refusing to respond to the altered gravity pulling against her. But inside, her bones carried a new weight, not of shame but of awareness, of what it meant to win in a place that only celebrated victories from certain kinds of mouth. At home, her mother had begun receiving calls. They didn't come all at once, and they were never outright hostile, but they arrived with predictable civility. Concerned parents, thoughtful suggestions, veiled warnings. One was from a fellow parent on the PTA, who insisted she wasn't picking sides, but wondered if perhaps Ridgeway wasn't the right cultural fit for Shyla after all. Another came from a teacher, once friendly, who quietly suggested that transferring to a STEM-focused charter might allow her daughter to thrive without tension. Even the principal, Mr. Waverly, made his move. He invited Shyla's mother to campus under the pretense of a wellness meeting. In the conference room, over coffee and crafted sympathy, he used the phrase, "a graceful exit," 3 separate times. He never mentioned Braxton, never acknowledged the sabotage. He only smiled and said that sometimes communities shift, and that he would support whatever decision they thought best for Shyla's future. It wasn't a conversation. It was a warning with a smile. Shyla listened quietly when her mother relayed the meeting at the kitchen table that evening. She didn't cry. She didn't speak for a long time. She just watched the steam rise from her mug like it was trying to escape the room. Her mother's voice cracked once, not out of fear but rage she didn't know how to name. This wasn't just bias. It was institutional betrayal. A machine that had invited her daughter in only to dismantle her once she exceeded expectations. No one at Ridgeway had expected Shyla to survive, let alone win. That week, Shyla noticed teachers stopped calling on her in class. She turned in assignments that returned without grades, processing delay written in red ink, group projects formed without her name included. And when she asked for clarification, the answer was always administrative miscommunication, oversight, scheduling. No one dared call it what it was: strategic erasure. The system was closing in on her, one small omission at a time. Even the black custodial staff, the ones who had nodded at her in quiet solidarity, had gone silent. One of them, the janitor who always left fresh wipes near her desk in the science lab, wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. Ridgway's ecosystem taught everyone how to survive within its walls, and survival often meant staying out of the line of fire, even if it meant stepping back from the truth. On Thursday, she returned to her locker to find the air around it heavier than usual. Students nearby hushed, eyes fixed on their phones. A few recorded discreetly, pretending to scroll. Her locker door was slightly ajar. Her books, usually stacked neatly, were gone, replaced by torn papers, shredded notes and crumpled folders. Everything inside had been dumped, stomped on, and smeared with marker ink. A spilled carton of milk from the cafeteria reeked from within, but none of that pierced her until she saw the door itself. Etched deep across the metal, scratched in with something sharp and deliberate, was a single word: cheater. The letters weren't rushed. They were carved with purpose. Straight, bold, deliberate. No one claimed it. No one needed to. The word did its job. It wasn't just graffiti. It was gospel. Ridgway's final accusation, a last attempt to reframe the narrative before her brilliance could take root. A teacher passed by without slowing. A security camera blinked in the corner, unmoved. Shyla didn't touch the locker. She stood perfectly still, surrounded by silence and stares. In that moment, her mind didn't race. It slowed. She thought not of fear, but of clarity. How schools like Ridgway weren't built for people like her to win. They were built to absorb her silence, tokenize her pain, then spit her out when her presence became too inconvenient. She stepped back, walked to the front office. She didn't speak, just waited until a staff member saw her face and followed the direction of her stare, not at her, but through her toward the locker hallway. The front desk lady asked if she'd like to file a report. The tone was flat. Paperwork was offered. A counselor suggested, but no one offered protection. No one asked who did it, just how she planned to respond. She didn't answer. That night, her mother didn't ask for details. She saw the look in Shyla's eyes, that same tired steel she hadn't seen since the funeral. Instead of questions, she pulled out a plastic bin from the hallway closet and handed it to her daughter. It was her father's box, the one he kept locked in his home office. Inside were his old journals, flash drives and lesson plans, years of notes written to help students of color survive elite spaces that were never designed for them. He'd been fired once for calling out academic bias. They'd erased his name from the school website a week later. Now Shyla sat on the floor, the locker still etched in her memory, flipping through his handwritten notes by lamplight. His words weren't poetic, they were tactical. Calculations, warnings, strategies. And one page, folded inside the back cover, stopped her cold. It was titled, "The Disqualification Blueprint." Below it, her father had outlined how schools manufactured misconduct narratives to eliminate students of color quietly, framing them for cheating, rewriting victories as technical errors, or pushing them toward transfers before any records had to be amended. He had written, "If they can't beat your mind, they'll try to erase it, and when they fail, they'll pretend it never existed." She closed the journal. Everything had happened before, just not to someone they thought would fight back. The next morning, as she approached her classroom, a new sign was taped to the inside of the door, anonymous, printed in all caps, and posted right over the school honor roll board. Scholarship under review. The sign reading "Scholarship under review" stayed taped to the honor roll board all day. Even after faculty passed it multiple times, no one touched it. No one claimed responsibility. But everyone understood its meaning. The anonymous paper didn't need signatures. It had authority simply by existing. It was an echo of Ridgway's culture spoken through silence, sealed with implication. Shyla didn't react, not outwardly, but the words coiled around her like invisible rope. A new layer of psychological pressure added to the growing arsenal of academic sabotage. Her scholarship, earned on merit and sealed by national rankings, had been her only shield, and now even that was being targeted. What Ridgway didn't know was that someone was watching them from within. Miss Donahue had joined the staff 2 weeks earlier, a temporary substitute for an English teacher on leave. On paper, she was nondescript, mid-30s, quiet, polite, credentialed. Her resume didn't raise flags, and her arrival didn't cause ripples. She moved through the school with the kind of unobtrusive efficiency that Ridgway respected. But Donahue wasn't just there to cover literature curriculum. She was observing, documenting, and quietly, investigating. Before she became a teacher, Donahue had spent 5 years in educational equity consulting, hired by schools after scandals, the kind Ridgway avoided by staying ahead of the story. She knew how institutions covered their tracks, how bias traveled not in slurs or confrontations, but in data, omissions, and off-record conversations. She saw it in how certain students were always seated near the back, in who got called gifted, and who was labeled at risk, in the passive language used in staff meetings, and in how fast concerns were escalated when a student didn't look like Braxton Keller. It was on her 3rd day at Ridgway that she first noticed Shyla Carter. Not because of loudness. Shyla was never loud. But because of the space around her. The way other students moved when she walked through the hall. The quiet glances teachers exchanged when her name was called. The rhythm of discomfort that surrounded her brilliance. It was too familiar. Donahue began taking notes. At first it was subtle. Details in the margins of her planner. Observations coded into her daily summaries. She logged every instance where Shyla was excluded from group projects. She tracked the grade discrepancies between faculty feedback and actual work quality. And then, one afternoon, she overheard a conversation in the teacher's lounge that shifted her quiet curiosity into determined action. 2 faculty members spoke in hushed voices about containing fallout and managing the optics of the winner's challenge. One mentioned Shyla's name directly, not with concern, but with cold strategic detachment. The phrases "tighten her exposure" and "watch her scholarship file" were exchanged like administrative checklists. Donahue didn't just take notes after that. She took screenshots. Late at night, after students left and faculty cleared out, she stayed behind in the media lab under the pretense of grading. Ridgway's system wasn't well protected. The internal teacher portal granted limited email access for communication purposes. But Donahue knew where to look, and more importantly, what to look for. What she found wasn't just unprofessional, it was damning. Buried in archived faculty threads were emails that spanned months, even before Shyla's national exam victory. They referenced her performance as unexpected, her demeanor as emotionally closed, and her presence as misaligned with Ridgway culture. One email, sent weeks before the winner's challenge, questioned whether her score reflected external coaching. Another suggested a review of her admissions package for possible discrepancies, an accusation of fraud cloaked in academic language. And then the thread that made her stop breathing. A group email between senior staff, the head counselor, assistant principal, and 2 department chairs. The subject line, "Keep her in check." The body of the message was short, plain, but loaded. "We'll need to get ahead of her visibility before the narrative builds. Braxton's family is concerned. Let's monitor classroom dynamics and be proactive with documentation in case behavioral concerns emerge." There were no behavioral issues, no incidents, nothing Shyla had done beyond being extraordinary. But the email had already pre-written her downfall, a scripted justification ready for deployment. Donahue printed it. Quietly. Stored it off campus. She didn't trust Ridgway's servers. The more she dug, the more she found. PowerPoint slides from staff trainings that subtly encouraged a neutral tone when dealing with disruptive acceleration. A coded term used when students advance too quickly outside expected demographics. Memos discussing parent concerns about balance after the academic competition, never naming Shyla directly, but implying her win had damaged the school's image of harmony. And then came the final file, a disciplinary log labeled under her student ID, not her name. It had been created weeks ago, long before the locker vandalism or fire alarm. It was pre-filled with soft accusations, increased peer tension, potential academic irregularities, recommendation for guidance intervention. None of it factual, all of it staged. It was a trap, not an explosive one. Ridgway never worked with violence. It worked with documentation, red ink, technicalities. It didn't punish. It nudged. It didn't expel. It exhausted. Donahue stood in the middle of the lab that night, pages spread before her, heart pounding in quiet fury. She had seen this before, in boarding schools, charter systems, college prep academies. She had always arrived too late, after the damage was done. But now she stood at the edge of the machinery was mid-operation, and this time she had evidence. But Donahue also knew what Ridgway would do if she went public too fast. They would discredit her, claim she misunderstood the context, say the emails were jokes, exaggerations, incomplete. They'd spin it as a rogue interpretation. So she needed more. Not just document. She needed someone inside to speak, to crack. So she did something unexpected. She approached one of Braxton's former tutors, a senior, quiet, visibly nervous since the challenge had ended. He had helped set up the technical feed. Donahue sat near him during lunch, made small talk, offered nothing but presence. 2 days later, he slipped a flash drive into her folder. No word. The drive contained a copy of the full Winner's Challenge stream, unedited, and buried within the metadata of the video file. Timestamps were embedded, markers that showed when the buzzer delay was triggered, when Shyla's audio was lowered, when Braxton's footage was brightened. They hadn't just filmed the challenge, they had choreographed it. Donahue sat with that realization for hours. The sabotage wasn't speculation. It was quantifiable, traceable, and still no one had intervened. Not one teacher, not one administrator, just her. By the end of the week, Donahue had compiled her file. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but a dossier. Organized, clean, factual, evidence of systemic targeting. She printed a single copy, sealed it, and waited for the right moment. What she hadn't expected was that the school already knew someone was watching, because the next morning she returned to her classroom to find her laptop missing. Her desk drawers emptied, and on the whiteboard, someone had scrawled in red marker, "We handle our own." As Donahue ran to the office to report the breach, she spotted a new security badge clipped to the assistant principal's belt, with a blacked-out name label, and the Ridgway crest burned into metal. But when she asked for his title, the receptionist's voice dropped as she replied, "He doesn't work for us. He's from legal." The first post went live just after midnight. A black and white screenshot of an internal Ridgway email thread, cropped tightly around a paragraph that read, "She's not the right fit, but will manage the optics until post-acceptance." No names, no timestamps, just enough to stir questions. The account name was unfamiliar, a blank profile photo, no bio, no followers. But the content spread fast. Within minutes, Ridgway students began sharing it through group chats, adding cryptic captions. "Y'all seeing this? No way. This real?" By sunrise, 5 more screenshots appeared. One email joked about Braxton's guaranteed crown slipping thanks to scholarship charity cases. Another casually mocked Shyla's test scores, suggesting they were statistically improbable without assistance. Another simply said, "If we'd had one more white finalist, this would have all been easier." The final screenshot was the most damning. An image from the staff portal with Shyla's student profile circled in red. In bold above it, behavioral watch list candidate. Flag. If escalates. No one at Ridgway could deny it now. The screenshots spread like wildfire. Not just through Ridgway's internal channels, but across platforms. Instagram stories, Twitter reposts, TikToks with slow zooms and commentary. The anonymity of the account only added fuel. It called itself A Ridgway Truths, and by morning it had amassed thousands of followers. Students from nearby schools began tagging Ridgway's official accounts. Alumni started asking questions. News bloggers picked up the threads. Ridgway scrambled. The principal's office issued a vague statement calling the leaks fabrications meant to harm school unity. Faculty were instructed not to engage. Classrooms were told to stay focused. But no one was listening. Phones buzzed under every desk. Students whispered behind every hallway locker. Ridgway's polished silence had been shattered by its own hidden words. And at the center of it all stood Shyla Carter. No longer a whisper, no longer ignorable, but still isolated. She didn't post, didn't reply. But she watched. Each screenshot matched what she suspected. Not new wounds, but confirmations of invisible bruises she'd carried alone. She recognized phrases from staff meetings, saw timestamps from days she'd been mysteriously pulled from class. She read it all, with no tears, no rage, just a chilling clarity. It had never been about her behavior. It had always been about her presence. Her success had disrupted the school's illusion of equity, and the machine responded the only way it knew how, by building a case to erase her. But whoever ran the anonymous account wasn't finished. On the second night, a new post surfaced. This time it wasn't an email. It was a photo, blurred at first, then sharpened as the post updated. The image showed Shyla on stage during the challenge. The exact moment she pressed her buzzer, her hand mid-air, her eyes fixed forward. In the background, Braxton was visible, slightly out of focus, but recognizable by posture and uniform. His phone was angled downward, capturing the moment secretly. Across the bottom of the image, in bold white font, was a caption. "Even a monkey can memorize." The internet stopped. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the fury erupted. Comments flooded the post within seconds. Accusations, condemnations, demands for expulsion. Tag chains calling out the school. Journalists reached out to Shyla's mother. Civil rights groups began tagging Ridgway in protest. The caption was clear: racist, violent in implication, unapologetic in tone. The photo metadata included in the post showed it came directly from Braxton's iCloud folder. Same date, same timestamp as the competition. The post claimed it was auto-backed up by mistake. The implication was undeniable. That night, the Ridgway campus felt like it was shaking beneath its own weight. The administration called an emergency assembly, denying the photo was real. Braxton's family released a statement through their attorney, claiming the photo had been digitally altered, and the account was part of a smear campaign. But the damage was irreversible. Braxton's public image, once spotless, media-trained and socially protected, was now stained with the kind of evidence no school handbook could erase. Students who had once laughed at Shyla now avoided her completely. Not from guilt, but fear of proximity. Faculty walked halls tighter. Campus security increased. Some parents withdrew their students temporarily. The illusion of safety Ridgway had long relied on cracked visibly. Yet through all of it, no one at Ridgway reached out to Shyla.
No apology. No investigation.
No counselor session, only silence. She walked the hallways like a living reminder of what the institution had tried to suppress. A black girl who had not only survived sabotage, but now stood as the face of its exposure. But the weight of it was suffocating. At home, her mother fielded phone calls from activists, reporters, and strangers. Local news trucks circled the street. Online comments attacked their character, called Shyla a plant, a liar, a disruptor. Every platform became a war zone. Every scroll, another wound. And still the anonymous account kept posting. Not with more screenshots, but with cryptic captions now. Check who runs AV Club. Look at staff bonuses the week of the challenge. Not all allies stay silent. Some collect receipts. Shyla began to suspect the account wasn't just a student. The phrasing, the details, the internal knowledge. It read like someone inside the system. Someone with access. Someone who wasn't fighting for clout, but for accountability. And she wasn't the only one who noticed. That Friday morning, Miss Donahue found a folded paper on her desk. Unsigned. It contained only 2 lines. They know it's you. Lock down what mattered. Her heart pounded. She scanned the hall. Saw nothing. But she understood the warning. Ridgway's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. If they couldn't fight the leaks, they'd target the leaker. That afternoon, a school-wide email was sent by Legal Affairs. It claimed that an internal cybersecurity breach had compromised confidential documents, and warned students and faculty that distribution of sensitive content would be considered grounds for immediate suspension or legal escalation. They used words like privacy, integrity, and misinformation, but the message was clear: shut up or get shut down. But it was too late. The media had the story. A mid-tier investigative podcast picked it up and published an episode titled Elite Silence, Racism, Rankings, and the Ridgway Machine. It gained 500,000 plays in 2 days. Then a national outlet reached out for a feature on Shyla's experience. Protesters appeared at the school gates, small at first, then growing. Former students of color began sharing their own stories of being pushed out, ignored, or accused. A movement had started, unintentionally, but unstoppable now, and in the eye of the storm stood Shyla, unmoving, unflinching, yet privately unraveling. Every headline used her name. Every protest sign bore her image. Every thread used her story. But no one asked if she was okay. Even Ms. Donahue, as brave as she'd been, kept her distance now, not out of fear, but to protect what little could still be protected. The line between exposure and destruction had grown thin. They had to choose every move with surgical precision. And then came the twist no one expected. At 3:17 a.m., on Sunday morning, the anonymous account made one final post. It wasn't a screenshot. It was a screen recording, 28 seconds long. It showed Braxton Keller's phone gallery. Not hacked, not leaked, but screen recorded, from his own phone. The clip revealed him scrolling through his photo folders, opening the image of Shyla on stage, hovering over the caption, and typing in the words, "Even a monkey can memorize." His face reflected faintly in the glass. His thumb moved deliberately. The video ended with him hitting save. No edits. No deniability. Just him, recorded by his own hand, sealing his legacy in 28 seconds. The post didn't need commentary. The caption read, "No more lies." An hour later, the anonymous account vanished, wiped clean, deactivated. But in its place, A new folder appeared in dozens of student inboxes. The subject line read, Faculty Slack Archives. Read all of it. And inside were hundreds of chat logs. The first line, we warned them not to give her a platform. By Monday morning, Ridgway was unrecognizable. The carefully curated charm that once defined the school's atmosphere had curdled into something brittle and panicked. Where ivy once adorned the front gates, now stood protest signs, zip-tied to fences. Silence protects racism. Shyla deserved better. Unlearn your legacy. Students stepped over hand-painted chalk messages on the sidewalks. Phrases like gifted doesn't mean white, scrawled in bright red and blue. Teachers walked faster between classes. Heads ducked, coats zipped higher. Cameras from local affiliates parked across the street, lenses waiting for moments of collapse. Braxton Keller was nowhere to be seen. But Shyla Carter couldn't hide. She still had classes to attend. Or so the administration insisted. Her mother had pleaded with her to stay home. Even Ms. Donahue warned it might not be safe. But Shyla came anyway, because hiding would feel like surrender. And she had spent enough time being told to shrink. She moved through the corridors like a lightning rod. Eyes followed her with sharpness now. Not confusion, not curiosity, but blame. The leaked video, undeniable and time-stamped, had sent Braxton's reputation into a nosedive. College offers revoked. National academic honors retracted. Sponsors pulled funding from the school's honor society. The Keller family's legal team stopped making public statements. For the first time in Ridgway's history, their golden boy had fallen publicly, and the institution began to splinter under the weight of its complicity. But instead of lifting Shyla, the fallout twisted inward. In morning advisory, a memo was read aloud in all classrooms, carefully worded, pre-approved by Ridgway's legal team. It called for civility and healing, warned students not to vilify classmates or disrupt academic focus, and emphasized that everyone deserves compassion, even in times of controversy. It didn't name Braxton. It didn't name Shyla either, but every student knew who the words were meant for. A new narrative had taken root. That Shyla had gone too far. That she had ruined a boy's life. That the photo caption could have been a joke. That maybe, just maybe, she had encouraged the exposure for attention. Some students even called her camera bait in private group chats. Others reposted the video sarcastically with captions like, "Congrats, you broke the school." What had started as righteous fury from the public, justice finally surfacing, began to pivot. Influencers who once shared the Ridgway leaks started asking performative questions. Should we ruin teenagers for one mistake? News anchors debated the ethics of cancel culture. Anonymous users online started digging into Shyla's family, pulling up photos from her middle school years, speculating on whether her scholarship had been pity-based. Threads appeared questioning if she'd been planted to expose the school. A few even claimed she had set Braxton up. The truth had already been proven. But public opinion didn't want truth. It wanted spectacle, and Ridgway gave it exactly that. Instead of defending Shyla, the administration doubled down on neutrality. Faculty were instructed not to discuss the situation. Donahue's access to the staff portal was frozen without explanation. Security was increased, not for her protection but to monitor protests. The IT department wiped dozens of student inboxes, claiming the Slack files were illegally obtained. Students who reposted the leaks were quietly pulled into disciplinary meetings. Some returned with tears in their eyes and gag orders in their pockets. Behind the scenes, Ridgway was cleaning house, not by confronting its biases, but by deleting the evidence and recentering its image. And to do that, it needed a new villain. So it painted Shyla not as a student harmed by systemic failure, but as a disruption. Emails began going out to parents full of vague phrases like ongoing media complications, emotional stress on community members, and an accelerated scholarship candidate whose public exposure has caused unrest. It was all coded, scrubbed clean of overt bias, but the implication was sharp. She was a problem now. One family even requested their child be transferred from Shyla's math class, citing emotional discomfort. Her desk in that class remained empty for 3 days. No one sat next to her. The air felt colder than before, like she was being slowly frozen out of the institution she had academically bested. And then came the final blow. The guidance office called Shyla in under the pretense of a mental wellness review. But once inside, the counselor handed her a form titled Behavioral Reintegration Support Plan. It outlined goals like conflict resolution, peer empathy awareness, and rebuilding academic relationships. It didn't mention her trauma. It didn't mention the racism. It didn't mention the staff's emails, or the sabotage or the threats. Instead, it read like a reform sheet, as if she were the one needing correction. She didn't sign it. She stood up, slid the paper back across the desk, and walked out without a word. By now, even the students who once quietly supported her had grown silent. Allies went still. Club leaders stopped texting. The tutoring program she'd volunteered for suddenly canceled her sessions to reduce exposure. The new teacher intern assigned to help with her college prep application never showed up. Her emails went unanswered. Ridgway was cutting her off, quietly, methodically, like a limb they didn't want anymore. Her mother begged her to file a lawsuit. Donahue was compiling documents. The protesters were growing louder. And still Shyla went to school. Because every step she took down those halls was defiance. Because if they erased her from inside the system, she would still remain burned into its walls. That Wednesday morning, the school's silence cracked again, this time from the outside. A dark SUV pulled up outside the front gates. Two individuals stepped out, one carrying a tripod, the other holding a small leather-bound notebook. No school logo, no Ridgway press pass, just quiet presence. By second period, word spread like static. A national journalist was on campus. She wasn't a tabloid figure. She wasn't a blogger chasing clicks. She was a respected, decorated name in investigative reporting, a woman who had uncovered systemic abuse in elite private schools before. And she wasn't here by accident. She'd requested interviews with two students. One was Shyla Carter. The other was Braxton Keller. The school tried to block her. The administration told security to delay her, claimed ongoing privacy concerns. But she waited. Outside. For hours. Calmly. Persistently. She stood by the front gate, with her notebook, watching the protest signs ripple in the breeze, refusing to leave. By third period, cameras spotted her. A student posted her image with the caption, "She's here. It's about to blow up." Inside the halls, tension turned electric. Students buzzed. Teachers snapped at kids to stop talking. The principal disappeared into closed meetings. Parents started calling. And Shyla, seated in the corner of her government class, received a handwritten note from the office runner. It read, "Report to room 104. Interview request pending." She folded the note. Outside, the wind picked up. And in that moment, she realized something had shifted again. Not just in the story, but in the stakes. Because this time, the questions wouldn't be whispered. They'd be televised. As she walked down the hall toward room 104, her phone buzzed. A new video was trending. A hidden camera recording of Braxton's mother at a private fundraiser, angrily saying, "My son's life shouldn't be ruined just because she wanted attention." The caption underneath it read, "Ridgway's real voice." By the time the journalist stepped off Ridgway's campus, the school's PR machine had already begun its next act. Not a denial, but a reframe. The truth had come out too hard, too fast, and now the institution turned to its oldest tool, emotional reversal. That evening, Braxton Keller's mother appeared on a nationally syndicated morning show. The lighting was soft, her makeup subtle, the interviewer unusually sympathetic. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke about her son's unbearable grief, how he was being judged for a mistake without understanding the context, and how a moment of poor judgment shouldn't define a lifetime. The host nodded solemnly, never once challenging her. But what made the interview land harder wasn't what she said, it was what she left unsaid. She never mentioned Shyla, never apologized, never acknowledged the racist caption or the sabotaged challenge. Instead, she turned the entire incident into a cautionary tale about cancel culture and the fragility of gifted youth under pressure. That single appearance flipped the national mood. Comments under the clip shifted. Sympathy posts emerged, painting Braxton as a broken teenager who lost everything over a screenshot. Anonymous think pieces circulated asking if a student's entire future should hang in the balance of a single post. And then came the phrase that would be weaponized for weeks. "Don't ruin his life over this." It echoed through digital halls, crept into real conversations. Students repeated it in classrooms. Faculty whispered it in lounges. Even a parent at the next PTA meeting muttered it under their breath while volunteering. What had once been a wave of outrage now began folding inward, collapsing on itself with manufactured guilt, aimed not at the system, but at the one who had exposed it. Shyla felt the shift immediately. Teachers who had once offered guarded smiles now turned cold. One told her, behind a closed classroom door, that sometimes it's better to forgive than fight. Another left a pamphlet on her desk titled "Restorative Growth: Learning to Rebuild Community After Conflict." It was never signed, but the message was clear. Stop resisting. Heal privately. Make peace with what happened. But peace was never offered to her. Not when Braxton's supporters launched a campaign demanding his reinstatement. Not when students began reposting manipulated versions of the footage, muting the caption, or adding background music to soften its tone. Not when Shyla received a voicemail from a school board liaison suggesting she reclaim the narrative before it spirals. It wasn't justice they wanted. It was her silence. Ms. Donahue warned her that the administration was watching for any behavioral escalation they could use as justification to suspend her. The counselor who once handed her the reintegration plan returned with another form, this time labeled Publicity Protocol Agreement, urging her not to engage with the media without school approval. She didn't sign that either, but the school wasn't working alone anymore. Outside voices joined in. Braxton's family had deep connections, philanthropic donors, alumni networks, and legal firms, and now those networks were spinning his downfall as disproportionate punishment. Their public campaign was subtle but brutal, not attacking Shyla directly, but suggesting a larger failure in how young people resolve conflict today. As though she'd chosen any of it. The camera, the challenge, the sabotage, the fire alarm, the live stream, the racist caption. None of that had been her doing, but the consequences were now hers to carry. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the parking lot, a black sedan rolled to a stop in front of her house. It didn't honk, didn't wait, just paused long enough for the passenger to step out, walk to the front porch, and leave behind a thick manila envelope before disappearing down the street again. Her mother found it first. It was labeled in bold official font, Notice of Intent to Sue. Inside were printed pages of legal jargon. But the meaning was unmistakable. Braxton Keller and his family were suing Shyla Carter for defamation, emotional distress, and targeted reputational harm. According to the document, the viral video, despite showing Braxton's own actions, was being classified as a contextually manipulated incident and part of a targeted campaign to dismantle an academic legacy. The suit alleged that Shyla had enabled and encouraged the distribution of private materials and had directly benefited from the media's distortion of events. They were asking for monetary damages. They were asking for a public statement of apology. They were asking for silence, disguised as justice. That night, Shyla sat in her room with the letter unfolded before her. No headlines, no hashtags, no cameras, just words, cold, calculated, and legal. Her mother paced the hallway, trying not to break. Donahue emailed twice, offering resources. Activists began mobilizing again, sensing another wave coming, but none of them could remove the knot in Shyla's chest. Not because she was afraid of losing a courtroom battle, but because she understood what the lawsuit really meant. They didn't just want her quiet, they wanted her erased. And the next morning, as she approached school grounds, a new sign was taped to the locked front gate. Student access temporarily suspended, pending internal review. Her name wasn't on it, but her ID badge no longer unlocked the door. The morning her ID stopped working, Shyla didn't flinch. She simply stepped back from the gate, letting the hum of the locked reader echo in her ears. A few students across the parking lot paused, but didn't approach. No one offered help. No one questioned it. Ridgway's silence had become a second skin. The suspension was temporary, the email later said, a formality while the school conducted an internal compliance review. No mention of the lawsuit, no clear timeline, just a cold decision, delivered with vague, administrative phrases. It was Ridgway's way of cleansing discomfort, not with confrontation, but with exclusion. And that's when Miss Donahue made her decision. She had waited long enough. She'd gathered screenshots, saved email threads, archived Slack messages, preserved student statements, but the piece she'd kept untouched, like a final match waiting for the right moment to strike, was the full, unedited video of the winner's challenge, raw, time-stamped, and untouched by Ridgway's edits. It had taken weeks to quietly extract from the AV team's private server, back when the sabotage first became clear. She knew what she was holding. She knew the danger, but she also knew the cost of staying silent. Now, with Shyla suspended and being sued, the line had been crossed. She uploaded the footage anonymously. No flashy edit, no music, just a direct download link, titled Unfiltered, Ridgway Challenge Raw Feed. Within hours it spread like wildfire. The footage was over an hour long, crystal clear, multiple angles time-synced. It showed every second of the challenge, from setup to sabotage. It captured Logan tampering with Shyla's buzzer. It recorded faculty laughing behind the curtain when Braxton answered incorrectly, only for the judges to award him the point anyway. It showed the auditorium screen, glitching right as Shyla responded with the correct answer. A moment students had assumed was a coincidence, now clearly orchestrated. But what shattered any remaining doubt came 42 minutes in. A close-up camera caught Braxton during the break, unaware he was being recorded, leaning over to his friend and whispering with a smirk, "They're all just waiting for her to break down. She doesn't belong here." He wasn't joking. He wasn't flustered. He was confident. Certain. And the moment it hit the internet, so was everyone else. Public opinion didn't just shift. It detonated. The same commentators who once pushed redemption narratives now tripped over themselves to apologize. Journalists who hedged their headlines rushed to write corrections. Social media turned feral with rage. Not just at Braxton, but at Ridgway's entire system. "She belongs here" trended worldwide. Celebrities shared the clip. Law firms offered to defend Shyla pro bono. A university issued a full scholarship in her name. Unprompted, and for the first time in weeks, the narrative was no longer about Braxton's future. It was about what Ridgway had tried to bury. The court of public opinion doesn't require a bench or a gavel. Just a camera and a conscience. And now the world had both. In the school's administrative offices, panic broke open like a pipe burst. Legal teams scrambled. PR consultants were flown in. Internal investigations were paused, then restarted under third-party review. Faculty members were quietly dismissed. Ridgway's board held emergency meetings behind locked doors, guarded like crime scenes. Students flooded the courtyard that afternoon. What started as 15 protesters became 200. Fists raised, posters held, chants echoing against the once pristine walls. "We saw the truth. Justice for Shyla." Ridgway lied. Shyla watched it all from her bedroom window. Not through news feeds but live streams. Her inbox flooded with apologies, offers, statements of solidarity. But for every message of support, there were 5 from strangers telling her to be careful now, to watch her back, to expect backlash. Because even now, truth wasn't protection. Her mother paced, more exhausted than ever. "Miss Donahue left a voicemail. The video worked, but this won't be the end. I'm preparing for retaliation." Her voice cracked. "Be ready." But Shyla wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. Not loud, not reckless, but deeply focused. She didn't want revenge. She wanted remembrance, evidence, reform, change. And yet, amidst the celebration, one detail was still missing. Who leaked the original footage? Donahue had posted the unedited version. Yes, but someone, weeks earlier, had sent pieces to the anonymous account. Someone with access deeper than Donahue's. Someone who had unlocked Braxton's phone, posted from inside the system. The answer came at 3:02 p.m. in an anonymous message to a journalist's inbox. "Check the tech booth hard drive. Timestamp 11. The journalist followed it, publicly, posted screenshots of the hard drive's logs, showing logins from a faculty ID, and from a second, deactivated student ID. A former Ridgway student, one who had quietly withdrawn 2 years earlier, after being accused of academic dishonesty. The name wasn't released, but those who remembered. He'd been black, brilliant, and erased. The leak hadn't just been about Shyla. It had been waiting. Someone who had seen the sabotage before, lived it, and finally found the proof to break it wide open. Ridgway had thought it buried him, but ghosts carry receipts. That night, the school board released a shaky video statement. The principal stood stiffly behind a podium, sweat on his brow, surrounded by stone-faced faculty. He announced that the institution would be conducting a top-down equity audit, that mistakes had been made, and that those responsible would be held accountable. But no one clapped, because the real reckoning had already begun, and it hadn't started from the top. It started with a girl who refused to disappear, and a camera that refused to lie. As the press conference ended and cameras began to lower, one final question was shouted from the back, ignored by faculty, but picked up by every mic in the room. "Will you address the emails referencing her SAT scores being flagged before she even enrolled?" The board's press conference ended in fragments, but the damage was already complete. Ridgway's golden boy had fallen. By noon the next day, Braxton Keller's suspension was made official. Indefinite pending legal review. The school phrased it, but the real meaning rang clear. He was finished. Hours later, statements began to roll in from the prestigious colleges that once fought to recruit him. One after another, they revoked offers, citing violations of ethical standards and concerns over recent conduct. By evening, his image had been scrubbed from Ridgway's website, his name removed from the honor roll, his past awards marked with asterisks. Inside Ridgway, students didn't speak Braxton's name anymore. They whispered it. His locker remained untouched, sealed with caution tape. Not officially, but socially. No one wanted to be seen near it. A few classmates who once worshipped him began saying they'd never liked him anyway. Teachers who'd praised his essays now quietly shook their heads. Alumni groups purged his mentions. Online forums rebranded him from prodigy to problem. But as Braxton vanished, the spotlight didn't dim. It shifted straight back onto Shyla, and it burned hotter than before. Because while the system collapsed around its poster boy, it didn't protect the girl who had exposed it. It never intended to. Shyla's inbox filled with threats. Some anonymous, some with names she recognized. Students, parents, even former faculty. Accusations dripped with venom disguised as concern. You've ruined a legacy. He made a mistake. You made it permanent. Don't pretend you're the victim. Even strangers joined the fray. Right-wing blogs picked up the story, twisting facts until they barely resembled the truth. One article described her as the face of cancel culture gone too far. Another labeled her a radical plant sent to disrupt elite institutions. Conspiracy theories bloomed across platforms, shared by trolls and bots alike. They dissected her childhood photos, questioned her test scores, mocked her father's death as convenient. Outside her home, news vans parked like sentinels. They didn't ask for interviews. They waited for spectacle. Every movement caught. Every delivery filmed. Neighbors peeked from blinds. Friends stopped visiting. Reporters knocked at odd hours, flashing badges, holding cameras already recording. Shyla stayed inside. The walls of her house, once warm, now pulsed with tension. Her mother barely slept, pacing between windows, holding her phone like a weapon. They locked every door twice, drew curtains even when the sun still shone. At night, headlights flared too close, engines idled too long. The front porch light became their only shield. She didn't return to school. Even if she wanted to, the gate still wouldn't open. And yet the world kept moving. Not forward but inward, circling her like a storm eye that refused to pass. Miss Donahue tried to help. She delivered folders of legal options, press contacts, university outreach. She spoke with lawyers, filed formal complaints, backed up every piece of evidence again. But her voice too had begun to waver. Her classroom had been reassigned, her laptop erased. Her faculty email suddenly locked out. Ridgway hadn't fired her. Not publicly. But they were starving her voice. Minute by minute. The louder the truth screamed, the harder the institution worked to bury it under noise. One afternoon, Shyla watched an interview with a Ridgway parent on national television. A woman whose child had been in the auditorium during the challenge. She smiled politely at the camera. Tone controlled. "I think everyone agrees what Braxton did was inappropriate," she said. "But the aftermath, the exposure, the destruction of his future, that feels intentional, calculated, cruel." The interviewer nodded, letting the statement linger like a moral question. No one reminded them that Shyla hadn't leaked anything, that she hadn't recorded him, that she hadn't written the racist caption, that she hadn't pulled the fire alarm or sabotaged a single wire. All she had done was win and survive. But for some, that was the real crime. The idea that a black girl could expose their system and still walk away, unapologetic, undefeated, was more threatening than the act itself. And so they retaliated the only way they knew how, by trying to make her regret it. Anonymous calls began flooding her mother's workplace. A promotion suddenly stalled. Her aunt's small business received fake one-star reviews. Friends of the family were pressured to distance themselves. The weight of Shyla's resistance now crushed everyone she touched. Still, she didn't break. Not even when 2 Ridgway students posted a meme comparing her to a virus, captioned "This is why we need academic quarantine." They deleted it within hours, claimed they were joking, but the screenshot went viral anyway. Not even when a fabricated rumor spread that she had cheated on her SATs. The same lie Ridgway had seeded in secret emails months ago, now reborn through internet echo chambers. Not even when she caught her own face defaced in the corner of a private Discord server, her image photoshopped beside racial slurs. She stayed quiet, but not because she had nothing left to say. Because the next thing she said would matter more than anything. That night, after midnight, Shyla stepped onto the front porch for the first time in days. The air was cold, still. The street was quiet. No headlights, no camera. She just wanted air. She closed her eyes. And when she opened them again, she froze. Spray-painted in jagged black letters across the front of her white door were 2 words: "Liar girl." The paint dripped down the wood like blood. It hadn't been there earlier. Someone had waited, watched, timed it perfectly. The hate wasn't digital anymore. It was personal, on her home, on her safety, on her body. Her mother came running seconds later, phone already dialing. Police arrived too late. As always, statements were taken, pictures snapped. They promised patrols, offered nothing else. But for Shyla, the message had landed. This wasn't about Braxton anymore. It never was. Hours later, her phone buzzed again. No name, just a video file. She opened it and saw grainy security footage. Her porch, earlier that night, a hooded figure spraying her door, and then turning to face the camera. Not a stranger, a teacher, from Ridgeway. Shyla Carter stood on the porch, under the cold glow of the streetlight, the words "liar girl" still dripping from the front door behind her. The night had peeled away any illusions. This was no longer just school politics or teenage spite. This was a campaign of intimidation designed to erase her. Yet in the darkness, her fear was replaced by a strange clarity, a feeling that silence would only allow the stain to spread. By dawn, she made a decision. The world would hear her story, not for pity, but for justice. She typed a short statement on her phone. Crisp, factual, heavy with truth. She did not beg. She did not plead. She described what had happened. The challenge, the sabotage, the live stream, the racist caption, the threats, the spray-painted door, the video revealing the vandal. She ended with one simple line. She would not be erased. And then she published it. On Instagram, on Twitter, on a public Google Doc link, on every platform she could access. For a moment it seemed like nothing. The morning scroll of social media rarely remembers overnight posts. But by midday the first ripple hit. A former Ridgeway student shared her post with the caption, "I saw this happen. This girl speaks real." Then a second, then a third. Students from other elite schools across the country began responding, sharing their own stories of subtle sabotage, of being too smart, too outspoken, too black, too different. Under the hashtag Jean She Belongs Here, the flood began. Messages poured into her inbox by the hundreds. Some were from strangers. Teenagers posting scanned essays, SAT scores, canceled acceptances, quietly erased names from honor rolls. Others came with more urgency. Students still enrolled, whispering about pressure to keep quiet. Some offered solidarity, others offered help, legal contacts, activist groups, civil rights lawyers. The world outside her house, once silent or antagonistic, now leaned in. News outlets picked up the thread. Journalists called. Would she speak on camera? They asked. She declined. Her statement had spoken, but she offered her evidence. The video leak, the faculty emails, the locker vandalism, the threats, the hate spread. She agreed to interviews only if it was about broader institutional racism in elite schools, not just her case. The narrative shifted from scandal at Ridgeway to systemic exclusion and privilege bastions. At universities across the country, professors began posting solidarity statements. Alumni of top private high schools admitted their own regrets, going silent when they saw injustice. Educational equity organizations circulated petitions demanding transparent policies, independent oversight, and consequences for administrators who whitewashed abuse. Shyla's name became more than a headline. It became a rallying cry. Even in Ridgeway's small town, protests began. Students and local community members gathered at the front gate. Candles, signs, voices raised not just for her but for all the young people who'd been quietly pushed out. One evening, chants echoed against the stone walls. Real education means real justice. Passers-by filmed. Cars honked in support. On live streams, viewers sent donations for legal defense, for counseling support, for community education funds. The shift brought renewed danger. Her inbox darkened again. Not with threats of violence this time, but with legal threats. Trolls dredged up old rumors. Claims of grade tampering, accusations of lying, suggestions she manufactured evidence. Some tried to trace her home address publicly. Others doctored images, mixing her face with racist memes. But each time the outrage rose, so did her visibility. Each attack only spread the story further. Amid the chaos, an unexpected voice emerged. A former student of Ridgeway, one who had dropped out under suspicious circumstances 2 years before, released a video confession. He spoke softly, uneasily, but clearly long before Shyla had walked through the gates. He had noticed the same undercurrents. questions about grades, unspoken doubts, coded warnings whispered in corridors. He claimed he had evidence, screenshots of internal reports, emails, transcripts showing similar accusations against him. Mathematically flawless but too perfect to be believed. He claimed his name was scrubbed from records after he refused to leave, that he was erased before he could fight back. He handed a thumb drive to a trusted journalist and disappeared from public view. The files inside matched his story: perfect exam scores, letters of recommendation, then a sudden erasure, expulsion, withdrawal, empty records. The school had labeled him academically dishonest, without providing any proof. The only proof was coded language, external coaching suspected, unverified documentation, misaligned with school ethos. The same dehumanizing terms, used against Shyla, now had a pattern. The public reaction shifted again. It wasn't just about one girl now. It was about a system designed to protect legacy, whiteness and comfort, and expel everyone else. Major education publications ran exposés. Documentaries were proposed. Alumni across decades started coming forward, anonymously at first, then publicly. The movement was no longer reactive. It was foundational. It demanded accountability, transparency, and structural reform. Inside Ridgeway, walls trembled behind locked doors. The board scheduled not one, but multiple internal reviews. Teachers whispered in corridors. Administrators avoided eye contact. Security cameras were upgraded. Suddenly, every hallway felt watched. Every locker smelled of surveillance. The institution tried to insulate itself, but the leak had turned into a deluge. And Shyla? She refused to disappear. Every time someone tried to scare her, a new account followed her online. Every time Ridgeway tried to hush the story, a new testimony emerged. From former students, from parents, from faculty who had left, from educators across the country. Her pain became collective. Her silence turned into a collective echo. Late one evening, she stood again before her front door, the liar girl spray paint still drying in angry black strokes. Around her, candles flickered on the porch, placed by neighbors who refused to let her stand alone. A small crowd, scattered and wary, held signs: "Truth outlives fear. Erase racism, not students." Their voices were soft, but steady, their presence undeniable. In that moment, the stakes changed. This was no longer about clearing her name. It was about preserving the truth. About building a future where a student could win fairly, without fear of being erased for it. Behind the solidarity, behind the movement, one final message arrived for her. A discreet, unmarked envelope, slipped under her door late at night. Inside was a simple note, typed in plain font: "We're meeting Tuesday. Gate locked. No outside advocates allowed." It came with no signature, no name, no context. But its meaning was clear. The school board was calling an emergency closed-door meeting, and she was not invited. For the first time, a sense of dread rose inside her chest. Not for herself, but for everyone who now believed. Because if they decided the future behind locked gates, all the movement, all the voices, all the testimonies might vanish. Tuesday morning, as the board's black SUVs pull up to Ridgeway's empty front drive, and the gates lock behind them, a young student activist, a freshman from a neighboring district who had posted, "I believe Shyla," on their backpack, shows up at the locked gate with a camera, demanding to know, "Are you hiding the truth again?" The black SUVs slid into the empty drive of Ridgeway Prep early Tuesday morning. Their tires whispered over gravel. The gates locked behind them, with a dull metallic clang. Final, forced, sealed. Inside those cars sat the members of the school's governing board, heads bowed, voices low, faces hidden under hoods and briefcases. They believed the meeting would remain secret, confidential, a behind-closed-doors reckoning they controlled. But as the doors shut behind them, a hidden recorder began rolling. A single small device, tucked under a chair, unnoticed, because no one expected truth to come from where light never touched. In the high-ceilinged boardroom, oak paneling bore the weight of decades of tradition. Portraits of past heads glared down, their painted eyes following the occupants as they gathered around the long mahogany table. The air smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and nervous tension. Files were stacked neatly: admissions charts, disciplinary logs, scholarship records, anonymous complaint forms, all stamped with neat dates and official seals. On the wall, a large whiteboard was cleared clean, titled "Internal Review Agenda," but no bullet points yet filled it. The room waited, expectant, like a courtroom before judgment. When the first board member spoke, the tone was cautious, Soft words about reputation, risk, and perceived fairness. But soon the words hardened. Admissions had to be protected, the integrity of Ridgway's legacy preserved, and behind that ideal lay something darker. A system of quiet manipulation, scores marked down, names filtered out, evaluations rewritten, students of color, or without legacy, dimensionally too perfect, were flagged, not for misconduct, but for the hazard of being too good. The board's own internal language was chilling. Potential optics risk, community balance, preventive attrition. A second member leaned back, removing glasses, fingers steepled. He uttered the phrase plainly: the school could not, would not, allow an overrepresentation of non-legacy academic threats. He described targeted redistribution of scholarships to maintain a certain demographic equilibrium. When admissions staff objected that such actions violated fairness and possibly civil rights, legal counsel quietly cut in. The phrase echoed hollow: legacy status ensures long-term stability, disruptors bring liability. The tone was clinical, detached. The implication: if you don't belong to legacy, even brilliance becomes liability. The internal recorder captured it all. Every gasp, every swallow, every rustle of paper when the lead counsel slid documents across the table to be redacted for compliance. Screenshots of corrupted transcripts, manipulated to show grade fluctuations, were brought up, evidence, they said, of external coaching. In truth, they were proof of a culture bent on punishing excellence that threatened privilege. The meeting agenda shifted from damage control to cover-up. They discussed how to bury the leak, how to control future narratives. They planned to restructure oversight, install a new equity review committee, composed of hand-picked alumni, and institute confidentiality clauses for all faculty and staff. The aim to insulate themselves from any future exposure. They spoke unemotionally about consequences, financial ruin, legal liability, reputational collapse, not of wrongdoing, but of exposure. Their concerns were about optics, not morality. As the meeting wound to a close, a heavy silence settled. No applause, no relief, just the weight of decisions made in darkness. Members signed documents of mutual confidentiality and exited one by one through hidden doors, leaving no evidence, or so they thought. But in the hall outside, one man paused. The youngest board member, a pale-faced man in a tailored suit with trembling hands. He stood by the recorder, listening to the final minutes as the last voices faded. A single bead of sweat traced down his temple. His breathing was shallow. When he finally walked out into the daylight, past security cameras, past the parked SUVs, past the gates, he carried a different kind of burden. Not the burden of silence, but of conscience. He wasn't supposed to speak. Not yet. But the device stayed in his jacket pocket. The file stayed on his phone. And hours later, when the secret meeting audio hit the dark web anonymously, it carried his signature, not a name, but the moral weight of exposure. The leak was atomic. News feeds exploded. Educational watchdog sites published the audio. Transcripts appeared within hours. Headlines roared: exclusive, Ridgway board admits to systemic bias. Prestige school confesses to score suppression. Private prep's ugly secret, manipulating excellence to maintain privilege. Students across the country forwarded the clip. Parents demanded explanations. Alumni associations retracted donations. University admissions offices released statements promising to review former Ridgway transcripts. On social media, legacy not merit trended within hours. Every journalist invited back for comment. Every camera returned. The facade collapsed. Inside Ridgway, panic turned into chaos. The boardroom, once sanctified, now felt like a crime scene. Legal teams scrambled to respond. The lead counsel called an emergency press release. Carefully crafted, damage-controlled, but hollow. It condemned unnamed opinions and blamed a small number of former staff with outdated beliefs. It promised reform, but the words rang hollow. The transcript spoke louder than any statement. The students, many of whom had suffered in silence, the stripped scholarships, the erased grades, the quiet transfers, finally found voice. A wave of resignations flooded clubs, teams, volunteer groups. They posted testimonies. I was told my grades were too perfect. I was warned not to outshine legacy kids. I got a letter of misconduct that never specified why. Names, dates, evidence, recriminations written not in whispers, but in printed documents, now surfacing online. Unexpectedly, the school's own honor roll archive, An online public directory was altered overnight. Names from recent years vanished. Not just Shyla's alleged irregularities, but dozens of others. Students with no scandal attached. No protests made. Names simply deleted. The attempt was transparent. Too many people noticed. Screenshots, cached pages, digital archives preserved the disappearances. The attempt to rewrite history became part of the scandal. As the uproar grew, the board convened another meeting, this time under floodlights and cameras, with temporary members appointed pending investigation. One board member left mid-session. Not with defense, not with denial, resigning publicly. In a brief written statement, he called the previous meeting's decisions morally indefensible, the actions a betrayal of the sacred trust between students and institution. He added that he would cooperate fully with incoming investigations and hand over all records in his possession. The resignation sent shockwaves, but the unexpected twist came hours later. Leaked alongside the resignation letter, another document, a signed affidavit from that former board member, claiming that the manipulation had started decades ago, and that the earliest visible victims were students whose records had long since vanished. He named names, not only board members but admissions officers, tutors, past principals. He revealed that the scandal wasn't the result of a few bad actors, it was the result of an institutional doctrine, a strategy, a pledge to maintain exclusivity, not excellence. The affidavit concluded with a sentence that rattled the nation. They did not protect education, they protected privilege, and they erased innocence to do it. Across school districts, universities, and educational think tanks, audits were announced. Investigations launched. Former students began coming forward with stories, some shocking, some heartbreaking, but all similar in pattern. They flagged me for being too perfect. I was told I threatened balance. My scholarship was revoked for my own good. The system's net reached far beyond Ridgeway. It spread across the veneer of private education nationwide. In Ridgeway's once sacred hallways, the silence returned, but not as before. Now it was hollow. Doors closed, offices locked, security tight. Some teachers took leaves. Some parents withdrew their children. The school's enrollment dropped visibly within days. Dorm rooms emptied. Legacy board members scrambled for damage control, but even they couldn't outrun the weight of recorded confession. The evidence was everywhere. Amid the fury and the flashbulbs, in a small apartment halfway across town, Shyla sat alone, the resignation letter and affidavit open on her lap. She traced the bold signatures with her finger, reading words that eclipsed her own case. Dozens of stories, years of erased excellence, a doctrine of suppression. The files threatened to dismantle, not just a school, but an entire network built on selective memory and broken promises. Tears came, but not of fear, of sorrow, for every student who had lost more than a challenge, for every future stolen quietly under the guise of legacy, for every silent voice, silenced again. And yet, in that grief, there was resolve, because the leak proved one thing: truth can't be locked behind closed doors forever. It can't be silenced by briefcases or hush money. It can't be buried if someone chooses to listen. Shyla closed her eyes. Her grief sharpened into clarity. Her pain lined into purpose. She stood up, gathered the documents, and walked to the window overlooking the city lights. Somewhere, cameras still rolled. Reporters still waited. Protesters still marched. The dossier was about to be released publicly. The resignation was just the beginning, because this time, the system had no place left to hide. As the files went live and the world watched, the screen of Shyla's phone lit up again. Another anonymous message, this time with a single line: check gate 7 at midnight. We're not done. Months had passed since the raw footage leak, the protests, the swirling media storm. The world seemed to catch its breath. Headlines about justice, exposure, institutional racism, and student bravery faded from front pages. But for Shyla Carter, nothing felt resolved. The scars were quiet, but alive, burning under her skin. She walked onto the stage in a grand auditorium. The lights were bright, crystal clear, unforgiving. A banner above read Annual Scholars Integrity Awards, a national forum celebrating academic honesty and fair competition. It felt surreal, ironic that she, once vilified for exposing corruption in a prestige prep school, now stood there to receive recognition for integrity. The audience included educators, activists, journalists, former students whose faces she recognized from protest signs, and a handful of reporters who'd covered her story since day one. Cameras aimed, Microphones tilted. The clack of shutters and tape recorders created a new soundtrack, one of accountability, not silence. Shyla's eyes swept over the crowd. She saw parents wiping tears, students holding "I Believe Shyla" placards, and a few strangers whose reverent faces reminded her that her struggle had become bigger than her name. She felt a strange hollow in her chest, a mixture of vindication and grief. She hadn't asked for this, but she accepted it, knowing it was more than for herself now. It was for every young mind crushed quietly under the weight of expectation, prejudice, and silence. When the presenter announced her name, the applause was soft at first, tentative, uncertain, as if the world was still deciding whether she deserved redemption. Slowly, it grew, not loud, not triumphant, but steady, encouraging, respectful. She stood, framed by the stage lights, absorbing the sound. Each clap felt less like celebration and more like acknowledgement that the truth had value, that truth could win. A thick folder was handed to her, a certificate, a monetary award earmarked for college tuition, and a short letter praising her courage, brilliance, and moral clarity. She held it close, but didn't smile. Instead, she exhaled slowly, letting relief ripple outward. For a heartbeat, the past seemed distant, like a broken film reel finally paused. Months earlier, when the leak happened, and the world watched Ridgway's fall, the school's administration had hurried to protect itself. Walls cleaned, security cameras installed, board members rotated, but nowhere in the filings had there been a public apology. Not until now. As part of the Integrity Award ceremony, the presenter, a national figure in educational ethics, read an official statement on behalf of Ridgway's board. The statement admitted institutional failures, acknowledged racial bias and structural negligence, and promised full cooperation and ongoing reform. It pledged an independent audit of admissions processes, oversight committees including student representation, and mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff. The board offered deep regret to Shyla and any student whose trust was violated. The audience murmured. Cameras flashed. For a moment, the apology felt like more than words. It felt like a starting point. Backstage, Shyla's mother stood by the curtains, arms folded, chin lifted. Her eyes glistened. For a moment, just a moment, Shyla saw the hope flicker in her mother's face. A hope that maybe this time, fairness meant something real. That perhaps the ladder of privilege could be dismantled from within. That silence wouldn't win anymore. After the event, as the crowd dispersed under chandeliers and soft music, Shyla walked through a corridor lined with plaque after plaque, each name a story, a triumph, a memory. She paused before one tile. Years ago, the name of the former student, whose files had erupted the scandal, the student whose erasure had first helped hide Ridgway's systemic bias. His name remained etched, untouched, honored. She didn't understand why. Maybe because the school's memory was selective, maybe because some stories they preferred to preserve, and some to erase. Her gaze lingered, a silent question. Outside, under the bright lights of news cameras, a group of protesters gathered quietly. Signs now read, "Systemic change or nothing." Not an apology, accountability. Honesty is more than a trophy. Some held flyers outlining demands, full release of disciplinary records, independent review boards, scholarship funds for wrongly accused students, public forums for transparency. Their tone was constructive, hopeful, but unwavering. Shyla slipped away from the crowd, stepping onto a small balcony overlooking them. The air was cold, crisp. She felt the weight of everything that had happened, the sabotage, the insults, the vandalism, the threat. She remembered the fire alarm, the black SUV outside her house, the locker carved with cheater, the spray-painted door reading "Liar Girl." She remembered the nights of fear, the days of isolation, the questions in silent hallway. She remembered the question that had haunted her. Does truth mean nothing unless it's approved by legacy? A phone buzzed in her pocket. A notification. At first she ignored it, but as she stepped into a quieter corner, she opened it. The message was simple. They released more. Attached was a link to a torrent site. A file pack titled "Ridgway Full Archives, 2020-25. The sender was anonymous, no signature, just a note. For every silent student, her breath caught. Against noise, cameras, applause, and medals, against every promise of change, someone had preserved the dark archive. Emails, admissions files, disciplinary logs, tutor reports, erased records, flagged transcripts, bland assessments, coded notes, removal requests, hundreds of pages, all dated, all time-stamped, all tied to students who'd never spoken, erased from public record, students of color, students without legacy, students who had vanished quietly. If true, this leak could unravel more than just one scandal. It could expose decades of systemic bias, designed not just to protect privilege, but to preserve it. Her phone buzzed again. A video file. She opened it. The screen flickered, then held footage, a montage of name after name after name, faces seldom shown, grades stellar, recommendations glowing, applications accepted, then rescinded, transcripts wiped, records destroyed, students disappeared, forgotten. At the end of the video, words scrolled, "We can erase a name, but we can't erase a story." Shyla dropped the phone. Her heart pounded. The folder in her hand, the certificate, felt suddenly thin, fragile, empty. Applause had noise, respect had glare, recognition had lights, but archives had truth, and truth demanded justice, not just acknowledgement. Back in the auditorium's quiet foyer, she felt the weight of hundreds of erased lives gather behind her ribs. She looked toward the crowd again, the reporters, the supporters, the former students clutching flyers, the parents hugging. They believed in her now. They wanted change. But did they realize how deep the rot went? The cameras were still rolling. Journalists approached with quick questions. Do you feel vindicated? Will you return to Ridgeway? What's next for you? Shyla stared into the lens, her posture steady. The hum of lights, the click of props, the flash of bulbs. It all threatened to turn this moment into another performance. She felt old fear stir, the one that told her silence was safer, that truth could be dangerous. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them. Direct, unyielding, clear. She lifted her chin slightly. Her voice, when she finally spoke, didn't shake.
There's more you haven't seen yet.
Cameras snapped. Tape recorders hummed louder. Reporters leaned in. The moment stretched and cracked. Because this time, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. If this story moved you, type yes in the comments and tell us, have you ever seen brilliance ignored because of who someone was, not what they did? Subscribe for more stories that expose truth and challenge injustice. Because silence protects power, but stories, they break.